So yeah, so now it's a moment of recording in progress. Yes. So in this context, I want to invite Flaviu Scavamaria, the president of MEPEI. We had the chance to organize together Eurodefense Romania and MEPEI this event as one of the numerous events in national and international level. So Flavius, I'm glad that you are now in Romania, for a short visit in Romania, and you had the time and the energy to organize and to cooperate for launching the discussion. Flavius, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor. Also, I would like to thank you very much all the participants, and good morning, Your Excellency, dear colleagues, dear friends, to attend and to share your views on this webinar that we decided to organize very quick, as Professor said, after the summit of BRICS in South Africa. We consider that is a very important, it was a very important event that BRICS countries are asserting themselves in a global politics, aiming for a greater representation and influence. So based on your expertise, we try to come up with different thoughts and ideas to see if this new format, this new extension is going to challenge or not the other Western format, G7, G20, or others format. And there is also other prejudice towards this new development. Others say there is a conspiracy theory of China, Russia, and other countries, and it's impossible also to develop these countries on this way they already presented. So we like also to analyze a little bit or the time that are allow us in order to share few sorts of view among our experts around the globe. I would like also to thank you very much for, besides our Romanian friends and guests, Minister Adrian Severin, Ambassador Viorel Isticioaia, General Adrian, General Corneliu Pivariu, Professor Florin Bonciu, our colleague Caterina Mazzoi, and our friend Victor Chonga, and the others who are coming from abroad, particularly Amina Khan, Director of Center for Afghanistan, Middle East and Africa from Pakistan, that she represents the Institute of Strategic Study, that we have a very strong partnership with them. Also, I am very pleased that Professor Adrian Severin is here, and during his intervention, maybe he will share with us few thoughts after the International Security Conference organized in Moscow. He attended, or we had the chance to attend this conference to see the atmosphere in Moscow. And that conference was exactly before this summit. So this is a short introduction. I would like to announce the order that we think about. It's better to have your intervention. And after that, we encourage to exchange our opinions. So we'll start with Professor Adrian Severin, and after that with Dr. Amina Khan, following by Ambassador Viorel Isticioaia Budura, then General Corneliu Pivariu, Professor Caterina Mazzoi, and Professor and Dr. Marcela Gania. Of course, any one of you that would like also to share other thoughts with us, you are very welcome, and for sure you will have the chance to express your opinions. I would like to start our roundtable, even though it's a virtual one, with Professor Adrian Severin to share his opinion and his thoughts with us. Professor Adrian Severin, you have the floor, but in this case, open the microphone if it's possible.
Yes, I think my microphone is already opened. You know, whenever I see Professor Liviu Mureșan, my microphone starts to function. Therefore, without any preparatory maneuverings.
Nu vă auzim. Cred că s-a închis de la sine. Nu știu. Așa,
yes.
E bine.
Now, okay. I open it. Somebody closed it. I hope it's not Mr. Mureșan who did it, because previously his microphone was unlawfully opened. Okay. So we were witnessing his very intimate thoughts he communicated to his assistants. Okay, to restart it, I'm happy to be with you here. I'm happy to see you on my screen here. I would have been much happier if we could have been face-to-face in a physical contact, waiting not so much for the speeches, but for the coffee break, during which usually you can hear more intriguing and more sometimes valuable information and thoughts. That was the case indeed with the Moscow Conference on International Security. It was the 11th edition of this conference. It was not very easy to reach Moscow, since you know, the flying areas are very much closed, and so we were obliged to a certain extent to fly from Istanbul towards the Baltic Sea before entering the Russian airspace, and this is just an example of you know, the unfortunate consequences of the unfortunate clash, war, whatever you call it, controversy between, not so much between Ukraine and Russia, this is for sure one important part of the whole story, but between the collective West and the Euro-Asian East, if you want, enlarged towards collective South. This is something important. This is something we have to be concerned with. Doesn't matter who is guilty for beginning it. It is extremely important how are we going to get out of it. And to my mind, all our efforts should be concentrated towards finding a way out. I would say a way out through which no one of the main parties involved, and I'm speaking here about United States, European Union on one side, Russia and the others on the other side, but everybody should you know, end this unfortunate story with the feeling that its image does not coincide with the image of the loser. This is also very important, and I think that even today's meeting, it's important not only in order to assess the BRICS developments, but also to make it understood that without communication, we cannot find a peaceful solution. Diplomacy is about communication, and we have to communicate first and foremost with the opponents, with those who we do not like, with those who have different agenda than our agenda, and not with our friends. With our friends, we have nothing to negotiate. With like-minded people, we have nothing to discuss or to negotiate. We have to negotiate with those who are not like-minded people. So, and only then we might find a solution to our problems and to our, you know, threats and to our fears. Okay. What was also interesting in this meeting in Moscow, it was not only to listen the opinions of the hosts, but also to meet many people from the BRICS area, if I may call it like that. And what I speak about BRICS area because BRICS area is bigger than the 5 countries which are giving their initials for the name of this organization. But it's much more. We are speaking with this collective South. I'm happy that some of its representatives are present here today. And it was really enriching and really enlightening to share views with the representatives of this country from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. This is very important, because if we listen only our own scholars or our own politicians or our own policymakers, certainly we have just a part of the story and we have just a part of the thought, but it's completely another thing if we listen people from Egypt, from Tunisia, from Iran, from Pakistan, from South Africa, from other countries, from Cameroon, from other countries. So even if we are not certainly obliged to agree with them all the time, but it's before deciding if we should agree or should not agree with them, we first have to listen to them and try to understand their thoughts and their fears and their expectations. Now, coming closer to the topic of today, I would say that on one hand, it's very timely and it's welcome the fact that so soon after the BRICS summit, we are gathering to speak about BRICS. But on the other hand, maybe it is too soon since, we don't have yet the broad perspective which would allow us to assess not only the present, but the perspectives for the future. From my point of view, and this is my first idea, BRICS is not yet a product. BRICS is a process. So even if we can enlist a number of countries, as I said, the country which gave their first letters from their names as contribution to aggregate the name of this organization, I think that we still have to speak about a process. It is a fact in a process. And until this process will become a very well delimited, coherent product, is still time to go. So my second point is that perhaps it would be useful to make a comparison between the BRICS of today and the history of the European Union. Many times, well, I would go even back in time, and I would recall you the famous saying, Rome was not built in one day. So if Rome was not built in one day, certainly European Union was not built in one day, and certainly BRICS is not going to be built in one day. And we are perhaps at day one or day two or day three, but anyhow, there are many days to come during which this idea will get a shape and will become really efficient, functional, and coherent. And by saying that, I'm not willing to criticize or to point out the weaknesses of what we have today in BRICS, but to respond to those who are very fast in saying that BRICS is just a joke, that BRICS is almost nothing, that BRICS is just a fairy tale, that BRICS have no future, consequently. I think that BRICS is the beginning of the process, BRICS of today, and I am sure, this is my instinct and my conviction, that this process at some time, at some point in time, will become a product. And then we will be invited certainly to assess, the value, the structure and the value of this product. I will also recall a saying of Jean Monnet, who was one of the founding fathers of the European Union. And he said, Europe will be built under the pressure of the necessities. Europe will not be built according to our wishes, but according and under the pressures of the necessities. I will move this thought towards BRICS. BRICS, to my mind, is something which was born, a process which started under the pressure of the necessities. It was not just a lab achievement, artificial creation, but it is the result already, the result of the pressures of the necessities. And the development of BRICS will follow a way which will be designed by the pressures or following the pressure of the necessities. And if this is so, my third point will be, which are those necessities which already put pressure on these countries and the other countries which joined already BRICS, or other countries which are willing to join BRICS in the future. And I think that one of these necessities, but not the most important, is the fact that the old world order, which we usually call Pax Americana, reached its limits. It's no longer valid. It's exhausted. It's unable to offer the incentives or the perspectives which has been offered by the founders of this or designers of this Pax Americana. And therefore, since the present Cold War is in crisis, there is a necessity to find a new and design a new world order. But as I said, this is not the most important necessity. It's the original one, but maybe chronological, the most important. But the most important necessity, systemically speaking, is the refusal of the United States to participate to the redrafting of the world order. United States does not want to abandon its order, and if America is willing to reset something, to define a new world order, this is the new order, as we say, of a Gepardian style. Gepardian style meaning let us change everything in order to change nothing. If we want to change nothing, we have to change everything. So this made it necessary for the BRICS countries, and by BRICS countries, I understand certainly also the countries which has been accepted recently as new members, starting from January 24, and those who are in a waiting list, on a waiting list. I think that these countries realize that, you know, the unipolar order cannot satisfy their expectations, that their strengths, the economic strengths, the social strengths, the demographical strengths, the natural resources strengths, but also the cultural strengths and eventually the military strengths does not allow them to be submissive to any kind of orders dictated by the others. So under this pressure, and seeing that United States and the European allies are not willing to cooperate in defining a new world order, which is really new and not just a Gepardian novelty, they have started to find their own ways. And this means that at least on a short term, we are going to have two worlds, if I may say so. You know, I said it before, the bipolar world order, which was characteristic for the Cold War, was one order with two poles. After this order died, we had for a while a unipolar order. Now, what we are going to have on the next year, during the next years or next time in a short future, it's not about a new bipolar order, but it's about two worlds which were not trying to conciliate their contradictions and their conflicts, but one of it will be organized on the basis of a multipolarity, and the other one is going to try to defend the unipolarism. I don't think that this attempt to defend the unipolarism will be successful, but it will harm for a while the efforts of the other world to build again a single world, but this time characterized by a multipolar order. So what I would say I will go closer to, I go towards the end of my intervention. I have noticed, for instance, some news concerning the fact that the main runners, the main candidates for the presidency of Argentina, which according to the polls are placed on number 1 and number 2, you know, in order of eligibility, have both expressed disagreement with their countries joining BRICS, and in a certain way suggesting that if they are elected, they will act, to withdraw Argentina from BRICS. If this happens, though I'm not sure that the electoral speeches are always transformed into real policies. But if this happens, this does not mean anything systemic. Because, for instance, United Kingdom quitted the European Union, and for good or for bad, the European Union still survives. If something threatens the European Union, is not Brexit, but the internal crisis of the European Union. So if Argentina quits, it's not so much of a problem, because there are and we can understand why does it quit, because there are pressures and for them to be kept in the, I would say, the area of influence of the Monroe American strategy. I heard also a candidate to the presidency of the United States. He probably will be not elected, but anyhow is a candidate, so it's a person to whom we owe attention. And he said something very interesting, that if he is elected, okay, he would propose a withdrawal of United States from Ukraine, together with the promise that Ukraine will never become a NATO member, in exchange of Russia's undertaking that it will not be active and BRICS will be not be extended in Latin America. And he called that a new American strategy for the Western Hemisphere. So we can also foresee some pressures on some other countries, and I have first and foremost in mind India to quit BRICS. I think that the vital interest of India does not match with such request. On the other hand, India is confronted with a high degree, with a high level of poverty, and on a short run, it could overcome this problem by getting not only money, but also modern technologies from those who are able to supply this modern technology. Certainly, America is such a supplier. And therefore, I can foresee also in the future some kind of a double game of India. But on the longer run, the vital interest of India, as much as I can understand this interest, will keep it in this global effort, in this process of the redefinition of the multipolar order. Secondly, there are some other countries which are going to suffer some similar pressures. I am sure that we might be witnessing in the future some conflicts between the members of the BRICS group, enlarge the BRICS group, because what we see today is that the countries defending the unipolar system are doing everything they can in order to fragment, to bring countries in the collective South into conflicts by seducing them, by putting pressures on them, and so forth, and so on. So the process ahead is not easy. The process ahead might witness all kind of conflicts and all kind of crises. But I believe that the process which started, as much as it is a response to a necessity, it will continue with detail which we cannot foresee today. But anyhow, under, as I said, the pressure of the necessities. And maybe just one single sentence which comes from my experience with the European Union. A step ahead requires another step ahead. So if we say, let's facilitate the trade, let's liberalize the trade amongst us, this would require the building of a network of transportation, because you need to move goods, merchandises from one place to another place. But if you start projects of developing a network of transportation, then you also need to develop a network for transportation of energy. So if you do that, you need, or in order to do that, you need money. And in order to get money, you need banks. And you need banks which would be favorable to supporting your projects, and not banks which will be under the control of different, maybe not friendly powers. And if you have this, you need a currency. And then certainly we cannot speak yet about the de-dollarization of the world economy, but the first steps are already done. And even if we do not see enough steps, for sure, this step will be imposed by the simple need of this country to use their own currencies in order to develop plans, programs, which are not supported politically by their global opponents. So these are steps which will be attracted one after another, and for sure, as it was many years ago when the Community of Steel and the European Community of Steel and Coal was created, very few would have thought to a single currency. But later, this single currency was adopted. It was thought at the beginning that this is a utopia. The utopia became a reality. Okay, a reality shaken by crisis, but I don't think that the common European currency is doomed to fail in the end. It requires reforms, but it's not doomed to fail. Therefore, I think that the way on which these countries have engaged will follow, as I said, the necessities, and will follow, you know, each necessity will be created, each new necessity will be created by each step which has been already done. And my very last, it will be a proposal. Just I will, because I see these similarities between what happened with the European Union and what apparently is going to happen with the BRICS formula. Of course, bearing in mind that the type of capitalism there is different, it will be different, probably the state capitalism, the time of societal organization will be different, and it's natural to be different as compared with Europe, with European one. But nevertheless, there are some similarities, and some of us here, and I would say with MEPEI, with Defense Romania, and some others, you know, we have the expertise, and we could indeed give advices, assist intellectually the countries which are in this process of building BRICS in order to transfer the know-hows or the lessons we have learned here in Europe with the European Union to them. And it's, of course, it will be their task to adapt, maybe with our help as well, those lessons to their peculiarities. I think that we maybe should put on our agenda this idea. I'm sure that our lessons learned here in the European Union could be very useful for those who are now starting a quite similar, not identical, but quite similar way towards building a multilateral order in their part of the world, in the collective South. But I'm sure that sooner or later, the North will follow the same trend. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for this introductory remarks and broad perspective you brought. It's a chance you had as Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also as one of the few politicians not in Romania, but also in Europe, having contacts in more than 50 countries, visiting and discussing about construction of different projects. So it's we will take account for your proposal, and we will work on that together with our colleagues. So Flavius, President Flavius Cavamaria, you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Adrian Severin, for your ideas and thoughts, and for sure we benefit from your expertise as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former President of Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe Parliamentary Assembly. That is one of your most important valuable that you added our trip to Moscow, that you can analyze the new situation also on that context. I would like to mention two things about the BRICS related to our discussion, that BRICS, for the first time, maybe until they organized the summit and it was established, got so many attention on the media, and we can notice that there is a revival of interest towards BRICS summit. I think it's based on at least three major points. The first one is Ukraine crisis. The second one is rising tension between West and China. And the third point is about economic growth and economic development, including Africa countries. And I would like to mention that this year summit has main objective to address also to Africa countries, BRICS and Africa, a partnership for mutual accelerated growth, sustainable development, and inclusive multilateralism. So I think also BRICS offer Africa countries an alternative voice in order to express themselves. They would like to be on the other, they would like also to have or has their voices on a world arena. Now we are moving to the next speakers, Dr. Amina Khan. She represents Pakistan Institute of Strategic Studies, and we'd like to have your thoughts from your region. Dear Amina, can you hear us?
Thank you. Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay. I'm having a bit of a problem with my video, so forgive me. I won't be able to put my video on. So thank you for inviting me. Yes, this is a discussion that is taking the time of Pakistani policymakers as well. You know that it's the first time that Pakistan, in fact, was invited to be a part of the BRICS seminar that was held in Johannesburg. So, you know, Pakistan is also, it is keen to join multilateral platforms. And I think BRICS is one particular platform that it's interested in, primarily because the lead role is of China. But I'll come to Pakistan a little later on. As I said, we are still assessing the situation, but let me begin by saying that, you know, considering that the world is grappling with multifaceted challenges, BRICS is clearly seen as an attempt to present an alternative to the existing world order. And considering evolving global dynamics, I think the expansion transcends being a mere strategic move. And I think this is important to keep in mind. Now, look, certainly BRICS has the potential to become a significant forum for addressing critical global issues such as trade, climate change, finance, and of course, energy security. But I think its impact extends beyond discussions to shaping the global economic landscape. And I think the important question here is, can BRICS create a new world order? And I think this is something that, you know, we will continue to grapple with because there are no immediate answers. Now, at the same time, I think it is important to understand that BRICS countries are not aiming to replace the West. Rather, I think they are seeking to achieve greater representation and influence, I think, in the global arena. Now, by working towards developing a new global model of governance, I think that is more consolidated and constructive rather than unipolar. I think this is, you know, the gist of it. Now, the clouds of BRICS nations has grown, but the bloc, I think, is much more likely to offer piecemeal economic and diplomatic alternatives to the US, which continues to lead the global order. And I don't think it's going to dramatically replace it. And I think this is something that we should keep in mind. Now, having said that, the expansion does add economic heft to BRICS, whose current members, which we all know are China, Brazil, Russia, India, and of course, South Africa, as the world enters a new period of turbulence and transformation. Now, the expansion will alter the fabrics of the BRICS institution, I think, in two major ways. First, it could change the structure of negotiations internally. And second, the addition of new members could move the institution away from its geo-economic origin, of, the 5 countries initially to, or maybe on similar growth trajectories to a more geopolitically charged organization. I think this is another important aspect to keep in mind. But I will caution that, again, this is just an assessment because it's an evolving process. Now, we've time and again heard BRICS members emphasize that it is certainly not an anti-Western bloc, and they often speak about strategic autonomy and multipolarity, and having their voice heard in the global arena. Now, I think these 3 things that I've just mentioned, strategic autonomy, multipolarity, and having their voice heard in the global arena is the main attraction point. And hence, you do have a long list of countries that do want to join BRICS, even though, of course, there are doubts about how successful it will be. Now, the reality I think that we need to focus on here is that 2 powerful BRIC members, primarily China and Russia, whether we like it or not, are locked in adversarial relations with the United States. And I think many countries following this trajectory are in the queue of joining this group. And I think this is a validation that both China and Russia still do carry enough influence in the world for other countries to be associated with it. Inevitably, BRICS is also, as I said, seen as anti-US West bloc in the same way that the Chinese sees the Quad, as a small US-led circle in the Indo-Pacific, or even, something similar to the AUKUS. Now, while the US remains important for many of the new countries that have entered BRICS, barring Iran, each of these nations, let us not forget, have been close allies of the US. So while they're still close allies of the US, I think it also signifies the desire for diversity, because I think many of these countries now no longer want to be seen dependent on the US alone. They no longer want to see the world through the United States alone, and therefore they are diversifying their options. And I think we've seen this in the case of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, which are not only the first MENA representation in the group, but they are showing that while they want to have a relationship with the US, they want to diversify. And I think, again, we have seen this also with the growing relationship of China in this particular area. Now, this does not necessarily mean the complete isolation of the US. Don't get me wrong. The US will still have a prominent role, but it does signify less dependence. And I would even go to the extent of saying even weakening the US influence in the region. And we did see this with the China-brokered Saudi-Iran peace deal earlier this year. Now, for Saudi Arabia and the UAE, as I just mentioned, inclusion in the group is potentially symbiotic, as both are looking to engage and deepen cooperation with non-Western countries. And of course, they want to diversify their economic partnerships as an additional hedge against the United States. Iran, on the other hand, I think it will be a big win for Iran, because I think it counters the US policy of isolating Iran, because slowly that is withering away. And I think we've seen this with, numerous examples that are taking place, particularly the fact that, China has been instrumental in this. You know that Iran has forged close ties with China. We've seen this through the 25-year cooperation program. And of course, through the mediation that China played with Iran and Saudi Arabia in the rapprochement. Moreover, Russia and Iran also have found common cause in their shared struggle against, the US. Whether it's diplomatic isolation or their economic ties deepening in the wake of the situation in Ukraine. So all these things I need to, one has to keep in mind while assessing the entire so-called expansion. Now, another important aspect is to focus on the oil aspect of this. Now, look, the grouping, as we all know, has 5 of the top, I believe, 10 oil-producing countries. So it is adding to its financial and economic heft. But again, the question here is, how will this play out for oil production and prices versus demand? This is a question I think that still needs to be addressed. What is apparent is that since last year, the Saudis have ignored repeated US calls not to cut production, as it would blunt the impact of sanctions on Moscow. Instead, Saudi has cooperated with Russia and OPEC to do exactly this in order to prop up prices. So this is something that one should keep in mind. Now, having said the above, look, BRICS, like any other association, faces a number of challenges. its declared ambition to become a champion of the global South. Again, question mark. Long-standing tensions could linger between member states who want to forge the grouping into a counterweight to the West, notably China, Iran, and Russia on one side, as compared to, say, India and Brazil on the other side. Now, BRICS also has not been able to achieve much, and the diffuse nature of their political and social interests means that, BRICS leaders do not always agree on issues. Some say this is the main reason that has prevented BRICS from becoming a more powerful or effective entity. Now, getting agreements among the 5 main countries has certainly not been easy. So the question is, with an expanded membership, will this complicate things? I think it will to a certain extent. Now, expanding the list of members does not turn BRICS into a potent bloc. If anything, the expansion could possibly undermine what little cohesion has existed within the group before the expansion. I think BRICS expansion announcement might serve one useful purpose, and I think that is telling the West not to take the global South for granted. BRICS countries also, let us look and talk about their economies. They have economies that are vastly different in scale and governments with often divergent foreign policies. Again, another complicating factor for the bloc's consensus, particularly when it comes to decision-making. Other BRICS members support fostering the creation of a multipolar global order. But as I said, Brazil and India have also been, are very, very close to the West, particularly India's relationship with America. Also, I think BRICS has far too often been criticized for failing to live up to its grand ambitions. And I think in this aspect, the new development bank within the institution has been struggling in the face of sanctions against the major shareholder, which is Russia. So with the new membership of authoritarian regimes such as Iran, this is another important aspect. The question arises, does the group really want to inherit the problems of the Middle East, particularly the fact that you have these tensions with Israel as well? I mean, why would they want this added burden? So these are questions to look into. Lastly, I will say rivalries. You cannot exclude rivalries. And, the growing geopolitical confrontation between China and India, it already casts a major shadow over BRICS and any attempt at creating a cohesive agenda. Now, with new members, let us not forget, comes new conflicts. Egypt and Ethiopia, they've been at loggerheads over, water over the Nile. Similarly, although, yes, we have seen the rapprochement signs between Iran and Saudi Arabia, tensions do exist in one form or the other between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So I think these and other fault lines will make it much harder, or rather, not harder, but it'll be a challenge to combine economic weight of BRICS and form it into influential political force in global affairs. Now, again, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, they are close partners and security partners, let me say, of the US. Even if they do have differences with Washington, and we have seen this particularly in the case of Saudi Arabia, I don't think they're going to abandon US security guarantees for, promises made by the Chinese. So these are the undercurrents that will continue to affect the institution. Now, I know Chinese President Xi, he called on BRICS nations and, he said that this is, we should practice true multilateralism and reject the attempt to create small circles or exclusive blocs. Well, to be honest, India is already a part of at least 2 small such circles. One is the Quad and the other is the I2U2. So, there are contradictions throughout. And then, you had statements coming out from President Modi saying that, resilient and inclusive supply chains need to be enforced. And this is obviously a euphemism for reducing economic dependence on China. So if anything, I think the BRICS expansion, it's likely to fuel competition and potential friction between these two, that is China and India, whose ties have already been strained by numerous conflicts. Lastly, I will say that for China, I think BRICS, it certainly is a glimpse of the contours of the new world order that Beijing has been trying to shape. The development is a big win, I think, for Xi, even if it's symbolic, who has pushed to expand the bloc and its clout, despite reservations from India and Brazil. Now, more so, along with Beijing, for Moscow as well, the expansion is, I think, a part of its drive to forge the loose economic grouping into a geopolitical counterweight to the West and Western institutions. G7, maybe. Now, Xi's offer of an alternative world order is finding certainly receptive ears in the global South, where many countries feel themselves marginalized in an international system that is largely seen as being dominated by the US and its Western allies. Now, the expansion highlights a shift in global geopolitical fault lines, invariably helping China to become a counterweight to the US and the existing world order that has been promoted by the US. Now, in this, I will say that one has to wait and see how BRICS actually, comes out of this, if the expansion does take place, because it's going to be next year. But I think all countries are looking at BRICS as a counterweight. And it is dividing the world into two counter blocks, whether we like it or not. And it will be seen as an anti-Western bloc. Now, for Pakistan, it's going to be a difficult decision because we do have a relationship with the US and our Western allies, but at the same time, we have a very close relationship with China. And we are struggling economically, but if countries like Argentina and Egypt can be considered, Pakistan certainly is an ardent supporter of multilateralism. It is a member of several multilateral organizations. And I think it will try to seek membership in one form or the other. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, for your presentation. Now we're trying to move to our ambassador, Viorel Isticioaia, a career diplomat with an outstanding experience in Asia affairs. He is a former ambassador of Romania to China, Mongolia, Korea, and one of the most important experience he got from the position to be head of Asia Pacific office in European External Service and the head of ambassador of the European Union to Japan. Besides going on, I would like only to say one idea related to what Amina Khan said. I would like to stress that besides the lack of that heterogeneity between BRICS countries, all five leaders reach a common agreement related to the criteria of joining BRICS. That means that you said it's very difficult to reach a certain point, a certain common point. But I think in a very crucial issue, they could analyze and to get a point. And of course, that you already presented about the enlargement, if it's working or not, maybe that was the idea to admit the countries they have different disagreements, as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and Egypt. It was impossible to accept only Egypt without Ethiopia or Ethiopia without Egypt. So we are moving forward. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you for your generous presentation of my glorious fast. I'm very honored to join all the distinguished panelists, and thank you to the organizers for the very valuable opportunity to exchange views on a very interesting topic. And I found the topic itself, the question, really challenging. But I will ask your kind permission to share a few observations. While I'm really humbled by the expertise of all the other participants, and I look forward to continuously learn from what they are going to share. I really agree with what was already said by the previous speakers. And I feel like many others, including some things which have been said in the international press, that the recent summit of the BRICS, it's a big step in a long game. But really, I feel that indeed the groundwork was laid for a new version of the global economy. And very much I feel that the BRICS as a forum, as a platform, has gradually found its reason to exist. And I agree with what Minister Severin has mentioned. It's a geo-economic process. It will take some time before we can see exactly its profile, its way of performing and proposing new things to the world. But at the same time, I think what has happened at this summit and the projections for the extension next year and other things which have been stated by various leaders from the member states already, it's very much showing and proving that this is the result of the context. As a diplomat, I always look around in the context. And as it was already partially mentioned, I believe that what has happened is the result of the impact of the trauma in Ukraine, the result of the way in which the relationship with Russia is handled, the way in which many countries feel in the so-called third world or in the global south that their voices are not heard, that many international institutions in the international governance are in bad need for the reform, things which unfortunately look like a challenge. Then very much I believe the people who are in the BRICS, they feel that this is a platform which offers something, maybe not necessarily now or next year when they will extend with new members. They may not necessarily feel like being the most powerful and the most relevant countries in the world, with a few exceptions, which some already mentioned, China, India, and the list may continue. But at the same time, it's something which may compensate a gap, a deficit of the international order. The fact that, as it was mentioned, unipolarity of the world is in decline, the fact that the international order does not respond to the needs, to the interests of many countries in the world, and many in the global south, they don't feel that their voices are heard, they don't feel that they are listened to. Of course, if you look at the summits which took place this year, for example, the one in May in Hiroshima, the G7 summit, it was very loud, and many things resonated in the world on many issues which are really hot and challenging. But at the same time, it was not a comprehensive answer to all the needs, the challenges, the problems. Because of that, I feel that the countries in the BRICS may have experienced at least a sort of a minimal feeling of a solidarity, which is possible. And I hope I'm not entirely wrong. The cohesion, the minimal, if you wish, the minimal cohesion which the bloc has experienced till now in this incipient shape is not based on the sort of ideological foundation. It's not about ideology and specific values and principles. The values are there. And some people do like to look back to things inherited, maybe with or without inverted commas, from the non-aligned movement, from the good old times like the Bandung Conference of the 50s of the non-aligned countries. And those principles are still cherished by some of the countries who are members in BRICS, China and even India, being those who are still very loud and very much cherishing those values. The non-interference in the internal affairs, sovereignty, the right to choose their development path, and many other things which I'm sure resonate in a certain way, if you wish, in the right way for the BRICS with many others, including with the future members or with the others applicants. And for me, it was very relevant the fact that the United Nations Secretary General Guterres was there and echoed BRICS call for reforms of the United Nations, of the United Nations Security Council, other international financial institutions like IMF and World Bank, and about the multilateral institution in general, which very much the Global South expects to be something, a process, to reflect the realities, political, economic, security realities of today. Then I really believe the summit has proved, including by the future expansion, a new potential. Not necessarily as a political organization, but in the way in which, and that was rightfully noticed by the previous speakers, in the way in which it has shown that there is a will to reduce dependency on certain big countries, which have weaponized their currency in a way which rather served their own national interest. And besides, the prospect of having a number of oil-producing countries, important ones, as you immediately can notice, may give the feelings that there is the potential also for creating a coalition of hydrocarbon energy, which could, alongside OPEC, play a certain role on the oil market. That's something which the Western countries may not entirely ignore. Again, for China, while I'm not entirely sure, and I don't feel that we have to look very much into what may be seen as the lead role of China in BRICS, but I believe that China may enjoy the fact that BRICS, it's a part of a process which benefits to Belt and Road Initiative, especially across the Middle East, including with the extension of the number of member states next year. Again, I believe the countries in the West, in the Euro-Atlantic community, should look closer to a certain aspects of the geo-economic impact of the BRICS process and its future expansion. Western future and commodities exchanges may gradually lose their manipulative pricing advantages. The high welfare G7 states may be flailing on their content with realignment of the global supply. Recently, we know how much, since the pandemic started, everybody was keen about how to cope with the supply chain disruptions, crises, and so on. Now, with this unfolding BRICS process, I think this realignment of the global supply may invite closer attention from the G7 states. And again, the Global South, through this unfolding BRICS process, may prove that there is a need for an increased transparency of the real value of imported goods, of their exports, of the way in which they import certain things from industrial countries. Then I see, as I said, BRICS as a geo-economic unfolding process with manifold impact and consequences. And again, the fact that they encourage the use of local trading currencies, of course, it's a wide interpretation linked to de-dollarization, but not only. I would say in many ways, that's an economic trade aspect which should draw the attention of the people in G7, in general, in the West. And again, looking at the region, already a number of very good things have been mentioned by Minister Severin and Madame Khan, and I'm very, very grateful for those enlightenments. I will add the fact that related to the remarks I've mentioned about the inheriting some values of the non-aligned movement. Very soon, next month, September, in Cuba. In Cuba, it will be a summit of the group of 77 countries, developing countries, which also inherit to a certain extent the non-aligned movements philosophy and attitudes. And guess who is somebody encouraging this process of new, let's say, more assertive role of this group at the United Nations in general, or in the international arena? It's China. And China has promised, you can check, a good deal of assistance and help to Cuba, not only in respect to this meeting, but in general for playing a more important. And I believe to a certain extent, the way in which Africa was the main topic discussed this time, the Africa outreach, was also sending a very strong signal to the way in which projects already developed in the last 2 years by the European Union, Global Gateway, by the United States with Build Back Better, and other programs dedicated to Africa, did not show exactly to the African countries what they wanted, what they expected, what they need. Then this gesture of BRICS, especially China, but to a certain extent also India, bringing Africa in the focus, I would say also was a very meaningful step. And it's something which not only invite the African countries to rally around this process, but also shows how much the Global South, as it was said, maybe offer certain alternatives, and the BRICS countries trying to enrich or test their capacity for building wider organizations which would give expression to multipolarity. I would say at the same time how much BRICS is sort of a bridge. I mentioned the relationship with Africa. I'm looking forward to see how much they are sensitive and receptive to what's going on in Asia, how much as a bridge, as I said, not only for filling the gaps in the international order, but also aware of the emerging markets in the global system, and the will to express and implement their capacity to participate at the decision-making for the global governance. Then finally, I would say I very much welcome the recent developments. As European, as a former European diplomat, as a Romanian diplomat, I would say we need to pay more attention to these developments. Already, Mr. President Caba Maria and Mr. President Mureșan have mentioned, to a certain extent, BRICS was below the radar, and that was not good. It's not the only thing which missed from the analysis and perception of the Western analysts, politicians, decision makers, and not necessarily missing, but being given, I would say, not exactly the most attentive and receptive look. But now it seems that suddenly it's seen as a catalyst and a challenge for certain type of changes which may not be easy to accommodate if accepted by the developed countries. That the values and the vision which incipiently the recent summit proposes, it's something which has to be responded in what way? Then the question we are trying to address today, in fact, it should be in a more attentive, more substantial way answered by the politicians, decision makers, and countries, either in G7 or in general in the Western community. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your presentation. Yeah, please, Professor Mureșan.
Yes, thank you so much for these ideas, also bringing in discussion which a very serious topic about also the importance of G7. It's not a problem that BRICS is now more important as G7 and so on. It's a period in which they have to accommodate and to find the common ground of cooperation and to avoid confrontation and the waste of resources and time and so on. And we have too many projects and too many problems at the global level to have this kind of confrontation. Yes, you are right, Ambassador Isticioaia, that till the end of the year we have several meetings which could bring new inputs for this broader picture, like Minister Severin have mentioned. We have to try to understand and to see how we can contribute. And yeah, it's a very challenging period. And so our initiative to have this discussion is also a humble contribution of MEPEI and Eurodefense Romania for bringing on the table these topics. I want to invite now, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation, Minister Werner Fasslabend from Austria and long years president of the prestigious Association of International Relations in Vienna. And I understood that you are now defending the institution in the period of summer holidays. And you have such a tough program. So thank you very much being with us. And we invite you now to have the intervention. And we will be very honored if you can stay also a little bit after your presentation. So alles Gute und viel Erfolg. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure. I apologize that I did not have the opportunity to follow the first two speakers, especially Adrian. Okay, I think I will get the information maybe later on. So far, maybe I will talk a little bit about things that are outspoken already. What I think this decision of the BRICS in the last conference showed was certainly a diplomatic masterpiece. A diplomatic masterpiece that set the global politics in a way we had not seen for many, many years. Why? It certainly was or will be an enlargement of the BRICS, not only with more or less the Middle East countries and Argentina, but it also means that there are consequences, direct and indirect consequences by this fact. Because what does it mean? It is a geostrategic enlargement. I mean, by now, it was more or less Russia, China, and India that really made this heavy weight of the BRICS countries together with South Africa and Brazil. But if you look to it geostrategically, of course, it was more or less big parts of the eastern, southern, and northern landmass of the Eurasian continent. Now it also will be the western part of the Asian continent, and at the same time also a big part or a very important part of the African continent with Egypt and Ethiopia on the one hand. But this also will mean that there are, of course, very clear geostrategic consequences for the future. Because if you look to the map, this will mean that the BRICS countries in the future will have control of the Suez Canal, of the Red Sea, and also of the Gulf. And this certainly will change the geostrategic situation, not maybe in the coming few years, but in the long run, maybe in a decisive way. it also does mean, if you don't look at it only from the purely state and political side, but to the ideological side, that the BRICS countries mastered now to bring in the leading countries of the Islamic world, with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, and with Egypt. And of course, with Saudi Arabia, with the Emirates, and with Egypt, also the leading countries, maybe except Morocco, of the Arab world. And in the future discussions, the global discussions and the global developments, this certainly will be an extremely important factor. At the same time, they managed more or less, to comprehend most of the important resources. China and Russia do have them already. China in modern aspects, and Russia in a multitude of aspects. And now, of course, more or less the whole energy sector also will be in control of the BRIC countries. Why? Because 3 of the 4 biggest oil producers, Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, will be members. And Venezuela will not be a member, but you can be sure it will be more or less under control or very close to the BRIC countries in the future. Not by geostrategic reasons, but by political reasons. Okay, so far, the outcome for me is that the BRIC countries will control more or less the biggest part of the global resources. And this certainly will sooner or later also have consequences for the markets, consequences for the prices, and so on. And you could see already in the past, just by the organization of OPEC Plus, when Putin and MBS more or less made new politics for oil prices, that this had quite some effect. And insofar, you have to be aware that similar things also could happen for other markets in the future. Yeah, just a few words, maybe also to the economic side. The big win for the group of BRICS certainly is that now not only China, but also Saudi Arabia and the Emirates have the function of big global investors. And therefore, together, of course, they can determine much, much more, as in the past, also the global investment politics. And what I heard, there were already discussions, of course, about the challenge for the financial system, the challenge especially for the dollar as the global currency. This certainly will come. Of course, it will not be a question of a few years, because it's not only the question whether they could manage, to sell oil not in dollars, but also in a new common currency or whatever. But also the financial system is behind it, and nobody has any comparable system as the Americans. But of course, this is a clear shot against the Americans, and it will have consequences. And one should not forget, that sometimes the American politics even were humiliating for the Europeans in this respect. Insofar, the question will come up on the table. Yeah, it will not only be the global South that will have new perspectives. Of course, it will be, or it is, a big victory for Xi, maybe also for Putin, in this respect, because I think that probably he has quite some initiatives on his side that went into this direction. But okay, Putin will not be decisive for the future, but Xi will be. And if you look to the personal situations and you compare now a little bit the situation on the Western side and on the BRICS side, you have to say, okay, whereas the Western side is in a not extremely strong personal situation. If you look to the American president, to the German chancellor, to the French president, by political turmoil he has in his country, by the British prime minister, who does not know how long he will be in this function. And on the other side, you have Xi, you have Putin, you have MBS, MBZ, Lula. Okay. This means that there will be quite some decision power behind it. And maybe this will be the biggest challenge. It also could be one of the weak points. At the same time, a stronghold, and at the same time, a weak point. Because, of course, in the longer run, it will be quite some management task to keep them together. Xi and Putin, MBS and MBZ, Lula, Ramaphosa, not easy, I would say, and this certainly will not make it sort of an alliance, but a club, of course. But one should not underestimate the consequences of this club. One outcome is clear for me. This has not only been a masterpiece, probably flowing more or less out of Xi's mind and Chinese politics. This means it is more than a wake-up call for the Western world. Much, much more than a wake-up call. It also does mean, that at least the Western world will have to develop clear strategy. First of all, a clear resources strategy. Without a clear strategy on resources, we will be dependent on the developments, on the decisions of Xi, Putin, MBS, and others. Okay. Second, the Western world also will have to overlook, of course, its investment and development politics. Europe doesn't have any. And America, of course, as far as I see it, does not have a very consequent one in order to set clear priorities and steer the global affairs the way it should be done in the developing countries. And insofar, of course, what was outspoken by Narendra Modi, one should not forget him, He certainly will be the key for the future development from the one world and from the other one. On the whole, of course, it will mean that this enlargement will bring new initiatives in the ideological battle between East and West. And it certainly will mean that the polarization into a two-poles world has made a big step further on. That's what I see. Everything else, I think, goes to the past. The key, how much there can be a third pole, maybe, probably will be in India. It will be with Narendra Modi. And therefore, the battle for influence and for closeness with India, not only due to its demographic development and future economic development, probably will be something that is highly interesting. Not only highly interesting, but could be decisive in which way the globe will go in the future. Insofar, I just want to come back to my first words. It certainly was a diplomatic masterpiece. Now, we are waiting for a masterpiece from the Western side, and especially from Europe. And my question is, will we be able to shape a masterpiece? And if not, will we be at least able to set concrete and very clear steps and priorities in order to take up this challenge? Because it will be an enormous challenge for the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your intervention. You brought in the discussion another perspective, but of course that is an additional to that previously our speakers said about or analyzed about this situation. But we are very happy that you had this opportunity to share with us your thoughts, Minister. Thank you very much.
Yes, Flavius, if you allow me just to add something, because I don't know if Minister Fasslabend is able to stay more with us. It's a fact that I very much appreciate as a diplomatic masterpiece, as you have characterized the event, but it can be also taken into consideration a change of attitude, a need of change of attitude of the West and US towards the other part of the world. Why? Because behind this group of people, countries, 11 to 40, are, as you mentioned, Minister Fasslabend, Russia and China. And now they cannot be taken just targets alone. They are in a group. And we will see what will happen in Cuba with development there, with the movement of 77. And you remember Romania was very active in this idea decades ago. So this is one issue. That Russia and China, yes, they are in front as representation, but if it's something to bring as a strength, they will be more powerful having behind and this group of people. Second, you are right. Our strategic partner, United States, has some problems with internal cohesion, some confusion due to the presidential campaign and so on. But what is mentioned also in discussions in Washington, Fiona Hill and others have mentioned, it's the need of more flexibility in U.S. foreign policy, the need of adapt their political statements on domestic level with strategic vision due to these changes of the security environment. So I think that BRICS, its construction, as it was mentioned here, it's a process but our colleagues, if they are allowing me, I can make a comparison as making a mayonnaise BRICS. So it's a problem of steering all the time carefully and drop the oil carefully, and then you will have a mayonnaise. If not, it's difficult to keep together this construction. So very interesting ideas and proposals. So I think that now we can invite. Thank you very much for this.
One point,
Yes,
Mr. Mureșan, with the mayonnaise, you need to steer in the same direction, not changing direction
sure.
now and then. Secondly, as you said, you have to pour the oil drop by drop. Patiently and taking time. Sorry for the interruption.
Let's make the mayonnaise further of our meeting, and Flavius.
Professor Mureșan, just one mention, because we talk about only BRICS, but we should do not forget about Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That is your main interest topic, Professor Mureșan.
Yeah, it was mentioned by Ambassador Isticioaia and also Minister Severin, so it's interesting. So now President and General Pivariu, you have the floor. Thank you so much accepting to be with us, and congratulations for all your intervention in the international mass media in Brussels and in other parts of the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mureșan, for the introduction and the presentation, and for the occasion to say some few words in this honorable audience. I will try to shorten my presentation in order to gain some time, and I will point out only the most important point of my ideas. Before this year's summit, the group represented 41% of the world population, 24% of the global GDP, over 16% of the world trade, and 29.3% of the total land area. This BRICS summit in Johannesburg, invitation were extended to leaders from 67 other countries, resulting over 500 official participants at the events. From the main points of the agenda, I want to point out that the subject of global security issue, including matters related to the new structure of international order, was discussed during the working session, but none of the BRICS leaders addressed it in the conclusion following the presentation of the final declaration. Additionally, there was no mention on the bilateral understanding reached in Johannesburg between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi regarding mutual de-escalation of border tension between China and India. It is worth emphasizing that in the final evaluation of the delegate at the summit, President Xi listed the newly invited state to the bloc, starting with Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. These states are part of BRICS Plus, or others are nominated as BRICS 11,